Conversation with the Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, professor of geography at Grand Rapids Community College, and today we're very fortunate to have Stuart Aitken, distinguished professor of geography at San Diego State University. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Mike. Thank you.
Well, Stuart, as I normally begin these interviews, I ask those that are being interviewed to reflect upon their backgrounds, to ponder what might have sparked interest in geography or to pursue geography as an academic course of study. Was there something in your childhood or somewhat later that sparked that interest? Would you care to comment?
Yeah, I can, and it's kind of boring. Probably much like many other geographers you've talked to, it was maps got me excited about geography. And the irony is that the maps that really intrigued me, I think, are some of the most beautiful maps ever produced, the Ordnance Survey maps in the United Kingdom. And the irony is
Dudley Stamp ones.
Right? Yeah. But I mean, but the thing is, those maps were developed in the 18th century primarily. And when you look at the numbers begin 1 through whatever it is. But the 1 begins in the north of Scotland, and they were started in Scotland as a way to subjugate the Scots after the demise of Bonnie Prince Charlie and the loss of Scottish independence. And they were put together as a military project. Now, I had no idea about that when I was a child. I just thought they were just beautiful. And so anyway, that got me into geography. I was focusing in geography in high school and then went to Glasgow University where I did topographic science, as it was called at the time. This is pre-GIS and all that kind of stuff. And
Glasgow had a fairly good reputation for its geography program also. Wasn't the Scottish Geographical Society housed there for some time?
Yes, that's right. That's right. It was. And the Scottish, the Geographical Magazine, the Scottish Geographical Magazine was published out of there, which I believe is the oldest geography journal on the planet. I believe it's still ongoing. It doesn't have an incredibly high impact factor, but it's got the longevity.
And so there you were in Glasgow, and was there anyone in particular that inspired you to pursue this study further?
Oh, well, that's an interesting, because Alistair Cruikshank.
He was a phenomenal, he had this connection with the U.S., and wasn't he doing some work with regard to fisheries in Europe, if I'm not mistaken, and other things?
I don't know.
And he was high up in the Scottish Geographical Society as well.
Right. In fact, he was the reason that the Scottish Geographical Society was in Glasgow at that time. When I was there...
a nice guy, too.
Oh, wonderful guy. And I was there as an undergraduate, and I finished my undergraduate degree in the early 1980s. And I had no idea what I wanted to do, Mike. I just, an academic career was not on the horizon for a working class kid like me. I mean, the fact that I was getting an undergraduate degree, I was the first one to go to university in my family. And I was talking to Alistair, and I never took any courses from him, but he was a wonderful, very loving, nurturing guy. And he says, do you have any plans for next year? And I says, well, I don't know. I thought I might go to teacher college. Planning's interesting to me as well. And he says, do you want to go to America? And I went, I beg your pardon? And he says, well, I got this connection with a master's program in Ohio, and I'll put your name forward if you're at all interested. And I went, well, that sounds like a bit of a lark. Yes, I'll go. And then he said, oh, and they'll pay you. And I went, oh, even better. Because I asked him, I don't know if I can afford it. He says, it won't cost you a penny. Or as the Americans say, it won't cost you a dime. And I went, so off I went.
And so you went to Miami University.
That's right.
And who was the chair of the department at the time?
Blah, 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 blah. Oh, I can't remember now who the chair was. Dick Smith. It was Dick Smith.
Okay.
And Jim Rubenstein was one of my mentors there. But one of the guys who really influenced me was Joe Urell, and he taught the philosophy course there. And I think Joe and Jim Rubenstein. Jim was one of the very young professors at that time. I know he's retired now. I was actually, when the AAG was in Chicago, I went out for dinner with him and his wife. But Jim was a younger professor, and he hung out with all those young graduates.
And he wrote a geography textbook.
I know, he loved that because he was a planner. He wasn't a geographer. He just happened to work in the geography department. And he said, yes, I've got the best. For a while, it was one of the best selling geography, human geography textbooks. He went, isn't that ironic? I'm not even a geographer. So anyway, Jim and Joe Urell, who didn't publish much, but he taught the philosophy course, and I loved it. And because of Joe, I wrote a paper for him on Patrick Geddes, the Scottish planner, and he says, "Why don't you try and get it published?" And I went, "Published? Are you kidding? I mean, me?" And he goes, "Yes, you could." And it came out in like the Ohio Geographers, the wee regional journal. I don't even know if it still exists. And that was quite something. I didn't think that that I had the capacity for that kind of thing. But that was great to get that thing published. Actually, see my name in print.
And so, what sort of research did you engage in for your master's work?
Yeah, my master's was in planning and geography, and I ended up not writing a thesis, but I had what is called a practicum report. I went to Baltimore with Jim for the summer, and I worked for the planning department. And I was thinking of becoming a planner, but although I had a great time and I really enjoyed the planning, we were working on gentrification in Baltimore, and it kind of bouncing off of David Harvey's work, gentrification in Baltimore when he was there, and trying to add some more empirical work to it. And I was interviewing a bunch of people.
Baltimore?
In Baltimore, yes. That was the summer of 1982. 1982, yes. And what put me off planning was the mayor came down to talk to us, and what we were finding out was a lot of the houses in Baltimore that were getting gentrified were actually being bought up by Washington, D.C. Real estate agents. And although they couldn't kick people out, they would find ways to up the rent so people had to move out, and then they would gentrify them. And we wanted to talk about this, and he says, "Okay, so I love the work you're doing, boys." And there was one woman, boys and girls, I guess. He says to us, "But you can't talk to the press about this, and you can't publish anything on this because we really need the taxes from these gentrified places." And I went, "Oh, okay." And that kind of put me off. The fiscal constraints, one thing, but also the bureaucratic constraints. And at that time, I had gone to a conference up in Ontario, and I applied for a PhD there, and they'd accepted me. So I went up to Canada for my PhD.
And what did you work on there?
Well, that was in geography, and that was a great time to be in. This was at University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, and Mike Goodchild was there at that time. John Janelle was there at that time. My advisor was Elaine Bjorklund, and I wanted to do something more cultural. I was very interested in environmental psychology at that time, and because Mike was there, I ended up doing modeling stuff, did psychometric modeling. I was looking at renter housing contexts of people and how renters perceive the housing market. But the big change for me, Mike, and I have to say this because I published a few things on that, but what I think has been my bread and butter research over the last several decades has been child research.
Sure.
When I was there, I got involved with the Children's Museum in London, Ontario.
Okay, so this is where that interest really was founded.
And there's a story there. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah, let's hear you.
First of all, Mike Goodchild is very influential.
And another nice guy too. Very nice fellow.
Yeah. And Mike and Fiona have been friends of my family for years and years and years, and I know that their family. And Mike loved to cave. And so we went caving. We went spelunking down in West Virginia with Mike. And I took my now wife, then girlfriend, on like our second date caving. And she loved it. I thought, this is the woman for me. Anyways, we got involved in the Children's Museum because a bunch of us thought we would build a cave for the kids. inside the museum, and we had some people who were caved with us who were not just spelunkers, but they could build stuff. I couldn't do that, but they could build stuff and all the rest of it. So we built this cave inside the museum, and this is the first children's museum in Canada. Not the first in North America. The first one in North America was in Boston, I believe. And it was a new kind of, it was like an experiential thing. My job when the cave was built was to be a cave person. And me and my partner, we went and I got a wig and I got some like leopard skins and we got a papier-mâché club for me and all the rest of it. And I ended up, when they opened up this museum, being this cave person. And we had little kids dressed in dinosaur outfits, and they came in, and so I'm in the back of this cave, and I'm picking away at things, and a photographer from the local newspaper comes in and starts flashing pictures, and I feign, being the ham that I am, I feign being frightened, but this is a monumental change, Mike, in how I'm thinking about research. And I'll tell you why, because I was doing stuff with Piaget and in Helder, Piaget's stages,
yes.
where we had all these bench tests for kids, and I'm working with these children on spatial cognition stuff. It's not my dissertation, but I'm working on spatial cognition stuff. And we got these, young men and women in there, and we're barraging them with questions, showing them photographs as per the environmental psychology stuff. And it occurs to me that I'm kind of bored, and they're definitely bored to tears. So with that said, here I am in this cave, and these little children are behind the photographer, and he's taking pictures, and I'm scared like this. And this young woman, this young girl comes up to me and starts patting me on the head and says, it's okay, it's okay. And she takes my hand and she leads me and she shows me the photographer and his camera. And then the other kids come and they start touching me, and it's like I was their pets or their confidant. And I see how, like in Disneyland, those dressed up as Goofy and Mickey have so much fun. And the kids then took me out of the museum and used me to scare their parents. And the program that me and this other girl had set up was out the window. And they showed me how the Coke machine worked and stuff like that. But what I realized, Mike, was that I'm up at the university with all these Piagetian tests. And here I am in the world of children, and I'm playing with them, and I'm acting, but there's something I'm getting that's very special. I'm connected to them in ways that I wasn't at the university, where I'm kind of the adult, researcher, and they have to do these experiments. And so I got really interested in qualitative methods, and I got really interested in the idea of playing with children, playing with young people as a method. And I took that idea.
You've written on that.
I have, yeah. And at that time, we're back in the 1980s, qualitative methods was not big I remember I get a paper turned down 3 or 4 years later from the professional geographer, because I was talking about the stories of children and playing with children. And they said, have you not got some real data?
Well, and this notion of children's geographies is really rather recent anyway. I mean, it really would not have been considered acceptable in the 80s.
No, it wasn't. And being the assistant professor, I did what they said. I took the stories out and I put in, and we did have some data. We had some semiotic data and we had some content analysis. And I threw that in. And me and my graduate student at the time, Joan Wingate, we published that paper in the PG. I eventually got the stories and published them in the Geographical Review years later, and also in a that I put together. I got the stories, that I really wanted to talk about. But that got me interested in qualitative methods. And although I was still doing the spatial cognition thing for a couple of years, I started moving away from the quantitative methods back, into qualitative methods. And it was wonderful people like Cindy Katz, Sue in Canada, who were starting doing work that was more critical, that was pushing back against the cognitive behavioral kind of stuff that I was trying to figure out when I was a PhD student. And I was very attracted to that. And a bunch of us, Joe Valentine was involved as well in the UK, and a whole bunch, Sarah Holloway and Harriet Beasley, and there's a whole bunch of us. were doing stuff with children in the. So I got the job at San Diego State in '86, and this would be the early '90s now. And I got a National Science Foundation grant to bring all of those young people together at San Diego, and a bunch of students. Mary Thomas, who's now at Ohio State, I think she's still there, came as a student. Harriet Beasley, who's now down in Australia, came as a student. Then Cindy Katz, Sarah Holloway, Joe Valentine came as junior professors. And we had a wee chat for over 4 or 5 days about children's geographies as a kind of a subfield. And then David Matthews and John McKendrick over in the UK started, a couple of years later, started the Children's Geographies Journal, which has taken off and done incredibly well. And I ended up being the North American editor for that journal. And it's really been fantastic, So that's how the whole children's geographies field started from an institutional perspective.
That's a fascinating story, and I'll ask you to offer some insight, if you will, concerning some of your later research that was associated with the migrant children, and the work that you had done also with Kate Swanson, for example.
Kate Swanson,
yeah,
yes, yeah. Well, I started. I started working with child labor in Tijuana, and this was wonderful. I am so indebted to the students that I work with, because Joan was working with me for that PG piece, and then I had this other student, Joel Jennings, who came and worked with me on his master's degree. He ended up going and doing a PhD at Cambridge, but he was just about to. We're doing the philosophy course. Another long story. I'm going to take up a lot of time with stories here, but Joel was about to drop out the program because he didn't have I wasn't his advisor at that time, and he didn't have a topic. And he said, this graduate work, I don't think I'm suited for it. And I said, well, don't drop out just yet. What are you interested in? And he says, well, I don't know what to be interested in. He says, well, I asked him, what did you do? And it turned out that he was part of a kids camp on board a ship in San Diego Bay. And what they did is they acted like 19th century mercantile rules with these kids, and they press ganged them on the ship, and they gave them all this rules and structure. And Joel and I ended up publishing a couple of papers about kids and rules and structure. But the point I want to make is he was down in Tijuana, and he noticed all these kids working as baggers at the checkout for these brand new supermarkets that were being established there. And he brought this back to me. And we ended up getting a grant on border issues. And I got one of Cindy Katz's students. It's all a small world, it really is, who was working in Mexico to join us. We started looking at child labor in these supermarkets. And being full of critical ideas, I was going down there looking for exploitation. And I didn't find that. What I found was that the kids loved working there. They had a sense of purpose, a sense of responsibility. And these were young, and they weren't getting paid. They were getting tips. So the supermarkets were getting free labor, basically. If there's exploitation going on, that was it. But me and Sylvie, who worked down in Tijuana, we were trying to get healthcare for the kids. So as well as doing the research, we wanted an outcome for the kids. And eventually we got that. Because they were part of a program called the Pieta Meta program. And so that was the child labor stuff. And I started doing child labor elsewhere in China and Ethiopia and other places. And then Kate Swanson came to join us. And her Spanish is way better than mine. So Kate's doing the work. She did a little bit of work with the labor stuff that I was doing. And then she pulled me into the unaccompanied minors work that she has now taken off with and done some incredible work. She's now a Canada chair up in Halifax. And she and I published a few things. We got involved with some people in Austin, Texas, and did the whole border and the unaccompanied minor stuff, particularly looking at the places that they ended up staying when they crossed the border here. We got into doing, with some difficulty, but we eventually got into talking to these young migrants who are primarily from Central America, not Mexico. And I was still interested in the Mexican migrants, but that was great work. And she's done some amazing work since then on that. My Spanish isn't good enough. In fact, it's awful to really follow that research. So I left it to those who were doing real ethnographies. Now, let me just say in my defense, when I'm working in Tijuana, where most of the kids speak English anyway, I go down there as a professor and I go, I can't speak Spanish. And these kids would go, you're kidding me. You're a professor and you can't speak Spanish. How stupid are you? And I says, I know. I'm totally dumb. Tell me about your neighborhood. Tell me about the barrio here. And what's the Spanish word for this? What's the Spanish word for that? And Mike Caruso, who's a sociologist who's done a lot of work with kids, did the same thing in Italy. And where, his Italian wasn't very good, my Spanish isn't very good, but you use it with young children who can speak some English to get them to teach you the Spanish or the Italian. And it's kind of like me as a cave person. I become part of their world. Now, I was once part of a session with anthropologists where I said, yeah, that's ethnography too. And they said it is not. I got into a lot of trouble with calling the work that I do with kids ethnography when I couldn't speak Spanish. But that's a whole different story.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about your research. Now let's talk about your role in the geographical organizations like the AAG and the Association of Pacific Coast Geographers. You've had leadership roles in each, and they've been instrumental. Would you care to comment on what you believe the purpose of the organizations might be from your eyes, and then also some of the challenges that you faced while an officer in the organizations?
Okay, that's a good question, and that takes me back to my PhD days. And I mentioned how Mike Goodchild was influential. Don Janelle was also at Western Ontario at that time, and Joe Urell got me to publish my first article. Don Janelle, I was. He says, "Would you be interested in going to the East Lakes Regional Meeting?" I'd never been to a geography meeting before. And I said, and we were all Don came caving with us with Mike and stuff like that. So we all liked getting dirty and all. We were all friends. And Don retired not so long ago, and we were all very young at the time. But Don says, "Come on down to the East Lakes meeting. We've got some funding to get you graduate students down, and you can give a paper." And I says, "I don't have anything to give a paper." And he says, "Yes, you do." I said, "No." And he says, "No, that paper you gave for my class on people's perception of downtown London, that'll do fine." And I went, "Oh, will it?" And so I gave my very first paper at a regional meeting, East Lakes meeting. And so I've always been very supportive of regional meetings. And, Alec Murphy from Oregon always shows up at the Pacific Coast Geography meeting with a van load of students. And I've always admired that he does that. And so we have a van too, and we now try and fill it with students and bring them up. But we have students. We have more students going to the AAGs in Hawaii than we do faculty members, because those entrepreneurs went and got themselves like a whole load of money, like $55,000 from donors and stuff like that. And they're all going, and they get more funding for travel than we do, which is great. I think that the regional meetings and when I was in Denver at the AAGs last year, I'm looking around and I'm going, I think I'm the oldest person here. And then thankfully, Jim Tyner's mum shows up, and she's an emergency professor from Long Beach, and I think she's in her late 80s. I went, oh, thank goodness.
She might be, yeah.
Yeah, she might be. But I'm looking around at all these young people, and I'm going, this is fantastic, because I remember what it was like to go down to the East Lakes meeting and then go to these meetings. And I met JP Jones and I met Vicky Lawson. And, and then I saw their students like Sarah Elwood, who you've interviewed. Mm-hmm. And it's just lovely, and the meetings are fantastic. So I can say after several decades that, I meet people like Vicky Lawson, and I only meet them at the meetings. But it's like we've known each other. Well, we have known each other for decades. And I know about her life, and I know, and she knows about my life and my kids. And so you get a cohort. And I met them when I was graduate students. And Vicky and JP, they were like PhD students from Ohio State. And that was very prestigious as far as I was coming from Western Ontario, But so I hung around with them on their coattails because they seemed to know what they were talking about. And Cindy Katz, and we all become friends, and it's a wonderful way to spend your career and your life, having those kind of friendships. So, and it's networking. So what am I saying here, Mike? It's networking. And the AAG, I was on council twice as a councillor. I was an editor of the PG for a while. That was traumatic because that was at a time when they were trying to reorganize the journals. And me and Janet Franklin thought we were doing a pretty good job because she's a physical geographer. I'm a cultural geographer with the PG. And they were trying, this was the last time the AAGs were in Hawaii. And I won't name any names, but the council at that time were trying to get rid of the PG. And we had a groundswelling from the membership saying, no, it's not going to happen. And I know JP was the editor of the Annals at that time, and it was very traumatic from him, very stressful. But we maintained, and the PG is still going strong, and the Annals are still going strong. But I think, the AAG has done a great job of, and then getting that big support from Routledge, when Bob Richardson was the executive of the AAG. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. It's become a little bit modified. It's become a little bit too big and corporate for my liking, which is why I like the regional meetings a little bit more. There's less pressure. There's less anonymity, but I still like the big meetings. I still enjoy particularly taking my students, and saying, come, like Don Janelle said to me, Tom, that paper that you wrote for my class is fine. Bring it. And they go, I can't. And then they go to the AAG and they look at some of these papers and they go, I can do better than that. And usually the student papers are way better than faculty papers,
Quite often they are, absolutely. I mean, and you're so right. These forums that are held annually, regionally, and then also nationally, or internationally, we should say, serve as a great place for students and faculty to convene, share ideas, and really become oftentimes reinvigorated with pursuing their focus, their research focus, or maybe taking a different direction.
Right. And I have one thing to say in a contemporary. I've heard a rumor. I don't know how it's true. You might know if it's true or not, Mike, but I've heard a rumor that the AAG, because of expenses, are looking at starting to having going down the road, having like virtual and regional meetings. And I know the main meeting is very expensive now, so that would be a reason to go that route. But going virtual is a very, very bad idea, I think.
I would have to agree.
Here's you and I virtual, but I also think that for me and my career and the networking, it's all about what happens outside of the talks. It's all that happens in the coffee shops and going for dinner, and I would be, I hope they keep in-person meetings. I really do. And I think they will at the regional level at the very, very least,
I can't see the national meeting becoming completely virtual, partly because it's a principal way of the organization gaining revenue. And it does not appear to be affordable unless a completely different model is established.
Yeah, I know. But what I heard was when I was at the APCG last fall was that they're very worried about Hawaii because if they don't get the turnout, they're going to lose a lot of money. So I don't know. I always thought it was a big, when I was on council, that's what I heard. The meetings were a big revenue maker. I don't know. I'm not on council anymore. I don't know.
We'll see what happens, but we do have a very eclectic discipline, and you have a department that's rather eclectic as well. In fact, it's really one of the relatively few doctoral programs that offers a lot of variety to different students who seek to engage in, explore different fields in geography. You were around, I guess, when the collaboration took place with Santa Barbara. And,
well, I was hired to help the so I came to San Diego State in '86, and we got the PhD started in '91, and a lot of credit for starting the PhD program goes to the person whose job I took was JP Jones, who went to Kentucky, and JP was Well, but also we had an incredible chair, Ernie Griffin, who had these ideas about getting a PhD program, which, as part of the CSU system, is not usual. Although we have
Right.
quite a number of them in Diego State now, and I want to give great credit to the faculty. We're a lovely department. I mean, I've been there for a long time, and I have been tempted to go elsewhere. I've had offers to go elsewhere, and I've turned them down because it's been a great place to work. And when I first arrived there, the senior faculty, many of whom had come in when it was just about teaching, it wasn't about research, they took on extra teaching load so that people like myself and Doug Stowe and Alan Hope, who were the young people, could focus on trying to get the PhD up and running, could focus on getting research grants and publications, and have a smaller teaching load. At that time, the normal load was like 3 and 4, 3 in the first semester, 4 in the second, and they gave us like a 2 and 3, which was still a big load. But nonetheless, it freed us up to do other kinds of things, and I've been eternally grateful, for that. And so the department's very eclectic. I mean, we cover the gamut from physical to cultural, from highly quantitative to qualitative, and we seem to get on quite well, and we seem to tolerate, if not understand, what each other does. But we also do, we have all these colloquia where we learn what all the faculty are doing, and the students are just lovely. They have so much energy, and we kind of coast on their coattails.
As is often the case, isn't it?
It is indeed,
It is.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we just have about a minute to go, Stuart,
Okay.
and I'm going to ask you to think about your career and the interactions you've had with students and colleagues, and I'll ask you if you have any advice or pearls of wisdom you'd like to share with graduate students or colleagues.
Yeah. Passion is good. And I always tell my students, like Joel Jennings back in the day, what are you passionate about? Follow that. You can make a dissertation out of that. And for him, it was about kids on a ship. For others of my graduate students, like Chris Lukenbiel that you talked to in this series, it was about movies and film. I think, it's an old adage that if you follow your passion, the universe conspires to make it happen. And I think that Paulo Coelho that's attributed to, but I think it's an older phrase than that. And I somewhat believe in that. It certainly worked for me. It's getting tough in academia now because a lot of PhDs want to have academic jobs, and there aren't that many academic jobs available as there were when I was coming out. So it's important to have a plan B. But having said that, I have 2 PhD students who didn't go into academia, who set up their own geocultural firm, and they do geography and ethnographic work with Native Americans throughout the US. And it's academia's loss that they're now in the private world, but it's the private world's gain. And they have before they set up their own company, they were in a large engineering firm, and they set up an ethnographic department in an engineering firm, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. So, and geography it has a lot of currency today. And our students, undergraduates, masters, they get jobs, they get work, because it's become way more respected in North America than it was when I arrived here. And I think that's testimony to people like Mike Goodchild and Don Janelle, and testimony to all the people that I've been talking about, and to the students that I've been working with who are out there now going, I'm a geographer, I'm a geographer. And I do ethnography, and I do this, that, and the next, and I tell my students I'm teaching undergraduate cultural geography, and we're talking about the Middle East, and I'm going, you can't understand what's going on here without understanding the spatiality, without understanding the geography. And in many ways, as Ed Soja says, it's more important than history. And I'll probably ruffle some feathers by saying that, but you can see that might be the case.
Oh, absolutely. You hear no argument coming from this direction, that's for sure. Stuart, thank you so very much for joining us today. It has been a great pleasure. We really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be asked. Thank you very much.
And this concludes today's episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you.